Some 4th of July fireworks at Southampton Village Hall. I'm Joe Shaw. This is 27 Speaks Behind the Headlines. This is our weekly opportunity to do a bit of a deeper dive into the week's headlines in the Southampton Press, the East Hampton Press, the Sag Harbor Express, and at the website 27east.com. I'm a consulting editor at the Express News Group. My panel this week are staff writers Jack Motz, Dan Stark, Hope Hamilton, and our features editor, Michelle Trauring. And we will start with Dan Stark. Dan, welcome.
Good morning, Joe.
So Southampton Village has been kind of spicy lately when it comes to local politics. And we had a swearing in this week of a new village board member and a returning village board member. And that evolved into then a little bit of a spicy scene. Tell us about it.
And Ed Simeone was sworn in for his second term on the board, and Willa Bernstein was sworn in for her first. And about an hour after the inauguration, the village held its organizational meeting. Now, typically this meeting is pretty chalk. It's a lot of appointing people to committees and designating liaison assignments for the trustees. So it usually goes pretty quick. That was not the case on Monday afternoon. In a meeting that went an hour and a half, Simeone and Bernstein were very much working as a duo and essentially challenged the power to make appointments to the village's regulatory boards that is held by the mayor. A lot of it centered around the Board of Architectural Review and Historic Preservation, and those two had took issue with the fact that one of the board members, a woman named Kathy Buxton, whose term is expiring, wasn't included on the agenda there. They had said that they didn't have sufficient time to include people on the agenda there. And I want to share this quote that Willa Bernstein had said here. Every expiring term of every board member should be appearing on this agenda, with each individual trustee able to vote on them and also to submit our nominees to replace these expiring terms so that they just don't roll over. I think the language of our is very important here because it shows that right off the bat, Simeone and Bernstein are working as a duo here to try to get their priorities in. Now, during the discussion here, Bill Manger, the mayor, is cited a section of New York State Village Law, Section 4400, which in his interpretation here gives the mayor appointment powers. And Bernstein was also discussing it at length with village attorney Eileen Powers there. So those two had a
What
different
was
opinion on
what
it.
was the village attorney's position on this? Because I know that Willa Bernstein is an attorney.
Yeah. So Eileen Powers' position, she had confirmed that Bernstein's point about the village code not mentioning anything about appointments for the ARB, but she supported Manger's position to say that Section 4400 rules that the mayor of villages has appointment powers here, and Bernstein's response to that was absolutely not. Those were
Hmm.
her words.
So this could end up being a pretty contentious new board with Willa Bernstein's election to that board. It's been a bit of a contentious board since Ed Simeone was elected, right? He came on and really provided the sand in the gears, so to speak. He's kind of slowed down some things and provided some objections here and there.
Yeah, when Ed Simeone came on the board in 2024, the board before him, Manger, had a 5-0 vote for a lot of the time. He came on, was definitely not in the Manger camp and was kind of alone on an island in a lot of 4-1 votes. Last year, Rob Coburn was elected to the board, and those two have voted together at times. But now it seems that with Bernstein's arrival, Simeone has this kind of rock solid running mate here. So it's going to be very interesting to see how things play out. I want to bring up another thing that happened too. The vote to retain Eileen Powers as village attorney there ended up being a split 3-2 vote, with Bernstein and Simeone voting against here. And there's another quote from Bernstein there where she said that her and Ed are, quote, being undermined trying to accomplish some of the things voters have us here to do. And
Hmm.
keep in mind, this was the organizational meeting, not even the first full meeting. So if this is happening tonight, I think we're in for a very, very interesting dynamic on this village board.
So let me ask, Rob Coburn had been sort of Ed Simeone's, he had sided with him on a lot of votes at the village lately. I noticed that he voted with the majority this time. I wonder if he's going to suddenly become sort of a swing vote.
Rob is a very analytical guy. If you go to any of these meetings, he asks a lot of questions here. He's a reasonable guy from what I have observed and in my interactions with him. So it's going to be very interesting. During a lot of these discussions that were happening on Monday, Coburn seemed to definitely be acting as a middleman here, asking questions that, trying to bring the two sides together here. But I think in this current board where you have Simeone and Bernstein on one side, and then Bill Manger and his new deputy mayor, Roy Stevenson, on another. Rob Coburn is going to be a very important voice to watch.
I think it's interesting. Ed Simeone has been sort of an objector at the village board, but he's a very low key guy. I'm wondering what the tone of these exchanges was. Was it fairly cordial? Did it get animated? What's that dynamic like right now?
It was a bit of both, I think. Ed was very much taking a back seat while Bernstein was kind of, I would say, leading the charge on this today. Definitely making her presence known at her first meeting. Her and Bill Manger had some exchanges, nothing too testy or with much animosity there, but it remains to be seen how future interactions will go there.
Southampton Village has been a hotbed of political intrigue in the last few years. So you're going to have your work cut out for you going forward, I think, Dan. Let me bring in Jack Motz, who is our East Hampton reporter. Hey, Jack.
Hello, Joe.
So let's talk. This is a little in the weeds, I think, for a lot of people, but
Yeah.
it's an important issue because the town and its building department has very much been in the headlines in the last year or so. What's going on now? What's the update?
So, yes, it is in the weeds, but it's also fairly straightforward, right? I mean, so there's this code section in the town code that says, a building permit must issue within all events within 15 days, right? If you have been following the building department, which many people in East Hampton have, that's not really something that's very realistic right now, right? I mean, there's been plenty of issues. There's been lawsuits, turnover, and then there's this backlog that's been going on for, a couple months. Basically the town, they got sued in May over this 15-day code. So someone had been waiting for 6 months for a building permit or for the town to even, respond to this application for a building permit. So they sued the town in May after 5 or 6 months of waiting. The judge comes in a couple of weeks later and says, the town needs to make a decision on this. It says in the town code that there needs to be a decision within 15 days. So the town quickly appealed that decision, right? They went to higher court, and now they're back at a town board meeting on Tuesday, and they're trying to figure out what to do with this 15-day code. Because again, it does say it in the town code that this needs to happen. But let's be honest, it's not really realistic right now.
Yeah, when was that added to the town code? Do we know?
2004. So it's been there for a while. A lot of that probably predates not only the issues in the building department, but the size of houses getting bigger and the development boom that's happened in East Hampton. So this is a pretty old code. It's pretty antiquated. And it's worth noting that a lot of the surrounding municipalities don't have any sort of hard deadline. Southampton Town is pretty vague in their code. A couple others say that, it needs to be done within a reasonable time or something along those lines. But East Hampton is pretty much an anomaly in having this code in there that says 15 days. So, now they're trying to figure out, as I said, what they're going to do with it. And there's a couple of different, things that people are thinking. Town attorney Jake Turner drafted this code that basically removed that 15-day requirement. A couple other people on the town board, when they were discussing that, they had different ideas. There's been a problem with incomplete applications according to the town. So, if you submit an incomplete application, you can't really expect a decision within 15 days, right? That wouldn't really make sense if you drew Mickey Mouse on an application, and then we're like, okay, we're going to sue you if you don't, make a decision within 15 days. So there's some talk about adding some language to the code, keeping the 15 days, but saying, within 15 days of a complete application, something along those lines, or raising that cap or raising that deadline, right? So there's a lot more time. There weren't really too many specific numbers thrown around for what they would raise it to. But that's pretty much the thinking right now. I think with all the issues that have been going on in the department, the general idea is to keep some sort of deadline in place and not necessarily follow, what other municipalities are doing that surround East Hampton, because there needs to be some accountability, right? They brought on now Chief Building Inspector Richard Normoyle last year in September. They've kind of said that this guy is the guy that we think can right the ship. He's got 30 years or so of municipal building experience in Western towns. I think Babylon and maybe one other. I don't remember off the top of my head. But he's got a lot of experience. They brought this guy on. They've also expanded the department a lot over the past year. They've worked with civil service on that, and that's become a big thing. And kind of buried in my story this week, actually, is a interesting little fact that they, for the first time in at least a long time within recent history, they're going to have a chief building inspector. That's Richard Normoyle, who was just promoted to that position from principal building inspector, and a principal building inspector as well. So they're going to be bringing someone on to kind of work under him. That'll be additional senior staff in that office to help kind of, guide what's going on there. There's a lot of really young and, town officials say enthusiastic staffers in that office right now who kind of came on with this new wave of people. So, having some additional people on the top, I think, is something that the town board is really, really looking at.
At the same time, even with all the new people that they've added, the 15-day schedule doesn't sound realistic anytime in the near future in East Hampton Town. I mean, they acknowledge that they have such a backlog right now, and even if they change the code to say 15 days after a complete application, there's probably no way the town can meet that kind of deadline. It's an intriguing problem when you have a
Yeah.
deadline and you have to decide we can't possibly make the deadline. So do we just get rid of the deadlines, or do we? It's a real dilemma.
And to be clear, these are all just kind of ideas. These are just what was kind of tossed around. This is all going to go back to the town attorney's office to figure out what to do with it. But yeah, I mean, you're right. If you're a builder, you're probably saying, well, I kind of want some accountability and I want to see what's going on in this office. And I don't know that doing away with it is the best idea, right? I mean, that's kind of, I think that's pretty apparent. It's also just, an update within the office. They're working through permits from February right now. When they came to the town board a little less than 2 months ago, they were on September. So, do the math. They've made some decent progress, according to them. But, we'll see. It's going to be interesting to watch. It's going to be interesting to keep an eye on. It's something that's been going on for, nearly a year. There's been lots going on in that office. We held an express sessions on it. So it's going to be interesting to see how it all plays out. And also, there was another code section that they were much more in favor of, and that has to do with this 2023 law over certificates of occupancy. There wasn't really any back and forth or anything on this, but basically what they're planning to do after they hold a public hearing and go through all those steps, is allow outside agencies to conduct CO inspections, which will kind of, hope to increase the efficiency with which this stuff is done. So that'll be interesting to see how that plays out. The town, I guess, earlier this year, they suspended enforcement of that law until the end of the year, just to kind of get things moving a little bit in that office as all these issues kind of mounted. So, they're focused on it. They're working on it. I think that it's going to be interesting to see how it all plays out.
Yeah, a lot of moving parts and important stuff for the local development community, no question. Jack, thank you. Appreciate
Yep.
it.
Thank you, Joe.
I'm Joe Shaw. This is 27 Speaks Behind the Headlines, and I'm bringing in Hope Hamilton, our staff writer. Hey, Hope.
Hey, Joe.
How you doing? So you wrote this week about a visit to the region by U.S. Senator Chuck Schumer. What did he come to town for?
So, Senator Chuck Schumer held a press conference that was asking for $273 million towards tick-borne illness and just tick behavior research in the 2027 budget. This would add $90 more million to the budget towards these efforts than was allocated in the 2026 fiscal year. So that's a big, big shift. And the reason that this shift happened was for two main reasons. One was that new data recorded 3,152 Lyme disease cases in 2024, which is the most of any county in the state. And the region of Manhattan to Montauk saw more than 6,600 cases this year.
Wow.
Secondly was the diagnosis of bourbon virus in Suffolk County, the first confirmed diagnosis of bourbon virus to Michael Larkin, who is a Suffolk County resident. And he was diagnosed by Dr. Luis Marcos and a team at Stony Brook Medicine. Dr. Marcos is an infectious disease specialist, and this diagnosis it was a long time coming. He first started this diagnosis effort 5 years ago, where the doctor sent his Larkin sample along with 129 other samples to get tested for these viruses for research purposes. And that's why it took so long, is because they didn't really have funding, and then they had to get it tested and do research on it. So this is a diagnosis that's really been 5 years in the making.
And that's a fairly serious disease. This is a new tick-borne illness for the region, right? We haven't seen that out here before.
Well, that's the thing. I spoke to a few different doctors, and it is new. We haven't in the way of we haven't seen it before. But the general consensus is that it's probably not as new as we think it is. And, perhaps these cases of chronic Lyme that people are seeing and such could maybe be these other tick-borne illnesses that we just don't have the correct, diagnosis and testing for yet. This research came back with two confirmed diagnoses of bourbon virus, one Larkin's, which was newer, and an older diagnosis, and one diagnosis of Heartland virus. And these are both viruses that are carried by the Lone Star tick. So we really can't catch a break from the Lone Star tick. But, the doctors say it's probably been around a lot longer than we think. And it doesn't necessarily mean that we have to have this huge moral panic about it at this moment. I think, the general consensus is just reiterating that education and prevention and awareness are the biggest ways that we can, deal with this moving forward. That's not to say that it's not a big deal, but it is to say that it's not necessarily time to freak out just yet.
You mentioned the Lone Star tick. For years we focused on the deer ticks, but the Lone Star tick has really become the bigger problem, I think, because it's a much more aggressive tick, right? It isn't quite as passive as the deer tick is. Lone Star ticks actually come after you.
Yes. So, deer ticks will wait in the grass, in the long grasses, and stay there and, wait for somebody to jump on, whereas the Lone Star tick will kind of look for people and chase if and that's something I think that many people don't know, and I think that a lot of people think that all ticks are only confined to long grasses, and that's certainly not the case. While they don't really know the full habitat of the Lone Star tick yet, it's certainly not confined to long grasses and could be anywhere in an area that's moist rather than dry, even, the dunes or the beach. So it's really something to be careful about.
And we are in the midst of tick season.
Yes.
And the hot weather recently actually, it's an irony that heat kills ticks. Like you use the heat of a dryer, for instance, to kill ticks in your clothing. But the heat that we experienced recently, even approaching triple digits, is actually really good for the tick population. They tend to thrive in that. It's kind of counterintuitive, but wish people would be very careful out there this summer. Take all the necessary precautions, and there's lots of advice for that. There's a great tick center at Stony Brook Southampton Hospital. You can go find that information really easily online. You definitely should. Hope, thank you. Appreciate
Yep.
your reporting. So for our silver linings piece this week, I bring in Michelle Trauring, our features editor. Hey, Michelle.
Hey, Joe.
So you wrote about a big fundraiser that's coming up. And of course, we're in the midst of the summer season and there's lots of fundraisers, but this one is for Wings Over Haiti. Now, tell me a little bit about this organization. It's a little different, right?
It is a little different, and I didn't realize when I first started reporting the story that it dates back to 2010. So they've been at it for 16 years, and I had no idea. So it starts with Sag Harbor artist Jonathan Glenn, who's had a pretty remarkable career. He's in his mid 70s now, and he's a pretty major artist in the American scene, and he's also a very accomplished pilot. And he was taking some trips down to Miami. He was flying down to the Bahamas, practicing his runway landings on some of the more primitive strips down there. And on one particular trip in January of 2010, he was making his way down south to Miami. And it was actually the day after a massive earthquake in Haiti. And something in him said, I'm going to keep going. I'm going to keep flying. And so he made his way down to Haiti and saw the devastation firsthand. He spent 17 days on the ground. It cost him about $900 a day to be there,
Oh.
flying medical supplies all over the place, trying to help these makeshift hospitals that were set up in schools that were so dirty and dilapidated that a lot of doctors decided it would be better to do amputations and such outside. It was
Mm.
really dire circumstances. And official reports later said that about 220,000 people died. An additional 300,000 people were injured. 1.3 million people were displaced. It was really, for such a small island, this
Yeah.
is a very, very major disaster, which I think sometimes we forget because it's been 16 years.
But
Um,
those conditions kind of persist, right? I mean, I think the country has had trouble even recovering from such a devastating event.
Absolutely, absolutely. Things in Haiti are still not great.
Mm.
But, 17 days went by, and the way that Jonathan put it was the people who had died, unfortunately, had died. The people who needed to be helped were helped, and it was kind of time for him to leave. He needed to go. And so we got back home to Sag Harbor, and he was kind of, sitting around thinking, they're still in a really bad situation. What can I do to help? And education was the first thing that came to mind. So in those 16 years since, he's helped open two schools, one of which he's kind of emeritus of. He doesn't have much of a hand in that. But the other school he's still very involved with, and it's in the town of Rankit, which is kind of inland. Quite a ways from Port-au-Prince. It's about 100 miles away. And the school right now is thriving. Its enrollment is 126 kids with the capacity to expand to 400. And right now they're working on raising money for water filtration system, a cistern system that will help turn humidity into potable water. And they also want to plant a community garden to help with some of their food costs, which is unbelievably the most expensive part about running the school. The
Mm.
school provides one guaranteed meal to every student a day, and those monthly costs are more than running the entire rest of the school.
Mm.
So those are their
So
efforts right now.
so this fundraiser is a huge deal for this organization. It's got to be one of their primary fundraisers of the year, right?
It is. It's on Saturday, July 18th. It's at the Tractor Barn at the Bridgehampton Museum, which is a brand new venue for the museum. And it's Jonathan gathered together, I believe this year it's about 70 artists, and they're doing a silent art auction.
So I love the summer season out here. A lot of people focus on the glamour and the parties and the fact that they're high end parties. People miss the fact that these parties almost always are for charitable causes and they're for local charitable causes. But in a case of like with Wings Over Haiti, it's a local organization that's helping folks elsewhere in the world. I think it's an amazing thing in the summers out here, the amount of money that's raised for all these different causes. And this is definitely one of them. This is an important cause.
Yeah, absolutely. And Jonathan said that more often than not, the funds that are raised from this annual benefit support the school for an entire year, which is really remarkable.
I wonder if people realize just how much of an impact they can have through attending these parties, doing things like that in the summertime. As I said, it's a part of the summer event season that I think we sometimes just forget because it's just so interwoven into the fabric of it. But we do a lot of really good things for a lot of really good charities all summer out here, and I think that's a great reminder. And I think Wings Over Haiti is definitely one of those. Thank you for bringing that to our attention, Michelle. We appreciate it.
Absolutely.
That's all we have this week. Thank you to Jack Motz, Dan Stark, Hope Hamilton, and Michelle Trauring. I'm Joe Shaw. We'll be back next week with another edition of 27 Speaks Behind the Headlines.